Hello, and welcome to the TrailManners podcast. I'm your host, Eric Manning, coming to you from the beautiful trails in Ogden, Utah, but connecting you to wherever trail, ultra, and mountain running takes us. We'll bring trail running to life with amazing athletes, discuss the latest topics, epic journeys, and get you stoked for your next trail adventure. We're sharing the moments that make life special, because even a rough day on the trail beats a good day indoors, and nothing beats time spent with good friends and great stories. Catch us here weekly for your dose of dirt, vert, and good vibes. So now it's time to top off your water, grab some cheese curds, and join us for this week's podcast, where we take you deep into the heart of our sport. It's go time. Hello and welcome to episode number 315 of the TrailManners podcast. Our guest today is Mr. Will Frantz, and we will be talking nutrition. The TrailManners podcast is produced for your enjoyment, and show notes are found at TrailManners.com. Come back often and feel free to add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at TrailManners. And don't forget to subscribe, review, and rate us on iTunes. If you're so inclined, TrailManners would really appreciate any contribution to our Patreon account at patreon.com/TrailManners. All links are in the show notes. Now let's get after it. All right, welcome back to the TrailManners podcast. As you heard, it's episode 315. We are back with a new guest, someone you haven't heard from on our show before, and someone I just met today in person. We are here to talk nutrition. I've got Will Frantz on. Did I get that right?
Yeah, you got that right.
All right, so we're going to sit here and we're going to talk about some nutrition stuff. But before we get started, even for our listeners, let's get a little bit of background of who you are, where you came from, and what you're doing.
Cool. My name's Will, and I am a nutrition coach, personal trainer, ultra running coach, and I originally from New Mexico, and I kind of grew up in a mix between New Mexico and Pennsylvania, and went to school in Arizona, studied philosophy, and was looking to be a lawyer, and decided not to go that route for a wide range of reasons, mostly because I did a couple summers in a law office and decided I wanted to spend a lot more time outside. And post-school, I ended up moving to Korea and teaching English, and ended up in Utah because I decided I wanted to teach snowboarding for some reason.
Oh, wow.
Ended up not doing that either. I worked a winter as a lifty, and then drove snowcats for the past 5 or 6 years.
Wow.
So that's kind of what I've been doing here. As far as the athletic side, in my teen years, I was fairly overweight, but always in sports, and did a bunch of diets to control things because it sucks. It just sucks to be overweight. And then when I was 20, I finally found some stuff that worked, be it intermittent fasting and whatever, for a short period of time. And I played fairly competitive ultimate frisbee, and got really into cycling and did all that. And when I was 26, my dad died, and I got really into the health sphere, right? So something like that's going to kind of drive you into learning more about health and nutrition, all this stuff, and ended up just diving down a rabbit hole. I've had a realization fairly recently that I'm probably somewhere on far functional end of the autism spectrum. So when I get into something, I really get into something, and ended up just diving deep, and did personal training stuff and nutrition for a little bit, and ended up working at a gym down in Salt Lake called Wasatch Fitness Academy, where I still work, and they tend to cater to a lot of outdoor athletes. So I ended up doing nutrition for some ultra runners and someone who's trying to climb Everest and all this endurance stuff, and found a knack for it. And as I dove deeper, I just kept not necessarily liking everything I was seeing. So I kept just diving and learning, and now I'm coaching people to run really far, and kind of fell in love with it myself recently. So.
Nice. Well, I mean, it sounds interesting too, and you could speak on this as well, but did you find when you got into, that training part where it's kind of the outdoor athletes, was it in your eyes, kind of a similar mindset, but also a different mindset than maybe other types of athletes?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, I think there's like a few ends there. So like you and I were just talking, there isn't like an Olympic end goal or anything like that. So there's very much a love of the sport for it that I always really appreciated playing Ultimate. Like there's a competitive scene now, but when I started, like it was still very much like club teams and you're not getting paid. So like
no Frisbee sponsors.
No, not really. Like now people are making a ton of money for it especially if you're in disc golf. But like I really like that. I like being outdoors. Like I like people who do really hard stuff. That's always really spoken to me. So it's just kind of the general appeal to it. And then another thing on the ultra end that's like really different is, God, I swear it's like 12 sports in one. Like a 50K and a 6-dayer are not the same.
Yeah.
And yet they're all an ultra marathon, right? So like you shouldn't fuel them or train them necessarily the same. So it's just like there's this appeal to it being difficult to train that I really liked.
So when you said you were about 26 when you kind of dove in the rabbit hole, I mean it's almost like asking your age, but how long ago was that? Like how many years ago did you just dive in?
Yeah, I'm 32, so 6 years ago.
Okay.
And I've always loved food. I started training heavily when I was 20, so I've kind of been in this, but the rabbit hole was like 6-ish years ago.
So let me ask you this, because I think this sets it up for us. So just in the last 6 years, there's been a lot that has gone on in the nutrition world. And I'm not talking just for athletes, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it used to be like there were 3 diets, right? There was like the Mediterranean. There was all these like different like books and trends and whatever they could be. But now it's just like every time I look, there's a new one. No carb, low carb, fasting, some other type of fasting, some other type of, thing. And then also, what's happened even more, and I'm not going to say just in the past 6 years, but we keep see it trending, is just like allergens, right? Gluten, all these other things. So there's a lot, when you're in that rabbit hole, there's just a lot more information, right? That you've really got to dissect through, because I think what we're seeing is what works for somebody here off to this side doesn't work for somebody else, right? Based on so many factors. And I think, to me, that's why everything in this sport, to me, is, I think nutrition is that moving target, but also that gem. If you can dial that in, it's like having the golden egg. Yeah,
I mean, I think stat I saw is like a large number of DNFs at least had 40% of them, I think, had nutrition as a factor. Might not have been the only factor, but somewhere in there. And then, well over 50% of athletes lose some training every year in this sport due to injury. And most of that, I think, comes down to either you're going too hard, too fast, and like following a training plan that you have no business doing, or you aren't recovering. And that's probably more common. So if you're not getting the food in, then you're ending up with these problems. And that's kind of where you end up in this space. Like unless you're really trying to be like top peak, best of best, like your exact intervals or hill repeats don't matter as much as getting this volume and then being able to recover from whatever you're doing. And if we're not recovering, you can't actually get where you need to go. So yeah.
Well, and I saw, like, just in the ultra running realm for so long, there was not nearly as many races, right? For a long time, there was like, you had these A races, and they were pretty similar. Your 100-milers were pretty much like the Grand Slamish type races. And I think now, where there's more and more races, people want to race more and more, right? Yeah. So they look at it, it's like, well, I don't want to miss that. And next month I'm doing that, and then the next month I'm doing that. And again, it's fun, right? And people love it. And I'm one of those people, that I'm like, oh, I'm going to sign up for that, and not realize it's, a race in February where I got to train all winter and hardcore or whatever. So, but I think that also is that thing that's that fine line of overtraining, not fueling properly, but the fear of missing out, right? You want to be with your friends. Hey, man, I'm running this race. You want to come with me? Yeah, why not? I got a couple extra days and, nothing else to do. So with the nutrition change, there's also a pretty big trend in the sport of just more and more options, right? You see a lot of the older school races, like, say, a Squaw Peak 50 here in Utah that used to, be sold out day one. And now it's sold out right before the race almost sometimes.
Got it.
Because there's just so many options. Yeah, right?
I mean, You could literally race weekly if you wanted to.
Oh, easy. Easy. Yeah, and not just 5Ks, but just like big, cool, awesome races.
Yeah.
All over the place, and that's kind of the other lure to it, But I would say I've gotten way ahead of myself in one realm because, Will showed up with cheese curds, and IPAs. So hello, and the funny thing is, for those listening, the IPA I have in my hand is a Kirkland Citra Hop Session IPA, and I was actually wanted to try these at our local, the Costco, but you have to buy a bunch because you're at Costco. So it's like a 48-pack. It's probably 24, but
yeah, it's a 24-pack.
Yeah,
which is still a commitment.
Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, if I don't like that, that's going to be long. That's going to be long 12 days because I'll drink 2 a day. But it's one I would actually have. Yeah. It's not like top 5, but it's definitely not the bottom of the rung. I see this as I see this as more of a solid summer beer.
Yeah.
It's a little bit lighter hop, not super strong or dark. It's not a hazy. And one thing I love with my IPAs, and it says it on here, lemon drop hops.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of lemon. So, hats off to you for bringing me cheese curds and beer. I mean, just automatically we became best friends.
I'm all about food, man. If you have a food passion, I'm more than happy to feed it.
Yeah,
so.
I think passion is one word you could use for what you brought me, but it's definitely 2 that I'm absolutely known for.
Yeah.
I think on my tombstone there'll be a etching of a hop on one side and a cheese curd on the other, and I would welcome that. So if I get to that point and anybody's listening, that's what I want.
I love the training stuff, but I had also considered being a cook for a while. Like, I just love food. It's really how I fell deep into this, and it doesn't matter as much to most people here, so it's not a big factor. But I cook, I eat, it's what I do.
I eat, and I love food, and that shows a little more than I like sometimes.
Me too.
So let's get into it. So nutrition, right? I mean, there's just so much going on, and there's some amazing, amazing athletes getting amazing results with different types of nutrition. I shouldn't say, but say dieting, or I don't even like saying that word. A nutrition plan.
Yeah,
right?
we can classify diet as what you eat.
Yeah,
right? But yeah, absolutely.
I think when people hear diet, they're like, lose weight.
Oh, I'm gonna lose lose 50 pounds in 5 days. Yeah.
But it's like a nutrition plan, and we've seen people. When Joel Hatch, the co-host, being on the show, there was a big trend. We talked a lot about the paleo, the whole food 30. It's a little cleaner eating. That way we've seen, obviously paleo side. We've seen fasting. Different types of fasting. There's intermittent, and I swear every time I turn around, there's a new type of fasting. And there's also, there's a big one going on now, kind of that no carb to low carb. In the running community. So let's just jump in and let's talk about some of these, because I know there's a lot of people that, either getting into running, and I could be wrong. I don't have your background.
Sure.
I'm not a science guy. I read, I talk to people, but I just really believe that there's not one magic way to do this, right? Because I look at all of them, to me, and they should be more of a lifestyle thing. And I think when we talk about nutrition for a race is one thing, but at the same time, you've got to have your daily nutrition and your training nutrition. And when you're not training, and we talked before the show started about cycling on your nutrition. So, let's jump into that. What have you seen right now as kind of, in your eyes, what's kind of the buzz? What's the hot topic that you see that I'm gonna put you on the spot? Which is the one thing you see that kind of makes your brain go, oh my gosh, like almost drives you nuts as someone that dove into this realm?
Yeah. So we're going to put a larger blanket statement. We can dive deeper on any of these things, but the one thing I see, and it's not just ultra athletes, right? I've seen this historically in CrossFit. I've seen it across the board. It is trying to apply a lifestyle diet to a performance space, or vice versa.
Okay.
Right. And I think the one thing we should really recognize with ultra athletes is at some point throughout your year, you're probably having at least a 10-hour training week, right?
Oh,
Probably more.
Yeah.
But we can at least accept that. And that is an insane amount of training. That is not a thing that a recreational athlete does in another space. I was a very competitive, I got to the finals in nationals and Frisbee in Korea. And it's not the most competitive in the world, but I was still training hard. Maybe topped out at a 10-hour week. Yeah. Now, if you want to even like get in the miles to run a 50 miler, like you have to hit that probably at some point.
Yeah.
So you are training to a degree that a like semi-professional athlete would in a lot of other sports.
Yeah.
And as a result, like you are going to need to periodize your nutrition a little bit. It shouldn't be the same all the time. And depending on what your training looks like, it's going to look a little different. Depending where you are in your year, it's going to look a little different. Your race day nutrition should not be the same as your daily nutrition. And if we're not shifting that around a little bit, it's kind of an issue. So like one of the things I see a lot of is a low carb approach. And I hate that term because it's meaningless, right? So like keto means a thing. It means you're eating low enough carbs to produce ketones from your liver. Low carb can mean anything from like 20 a day to 100 grams. Like it means don't eat any rice. I don't know. I've seen so many fucking definitions of this. Like I can't even, it drives me crazy, as you can tell. So like a low carb approach is fine for health. It is a health diet most of the time. Because if you eat excess anything, you end up with inflammation, and inflammation is key to like everything from heart disease to pick a thing, diabetes, whatever, right? But when you're training as an athlete, if you want to be able to push hard, if you want to be able to like have this extra burst of speed, having some carbs in your system helps. It's not necessary. Your body will make them. They're that important, but it's helpful. The real thing they do is they help you recover. So like post a big training session, if you have some carbohydrates, it will get you ready for another training session the next day. It'll also regulate your cortisol so you're not stressed all the time. So a like no carb approach feels kind of nutty to me for most people. Yeah. Some people do okay on it. But it's a little off most of the time. And then if you are going to do like a lower carb approach, I like it to be very strategic, right? So do you know who Chris Froome is?
No.
He won the Tour de France like 5-6 years ago, something like that. And he did it on a keto diet. He was also eating 300 plus grams of carbohydrates a day, because when you're burning 6,000 calories a day, you can do that and still stay in ketosis. And this is kind of like where the low carb thing is weird to me. Like we're using a very vague, potentially harmful diet to work in a performance space when it wasn't built for that.
Yeah. Because there is a difference, I mean, like you said, between a no carb and a low carb and a keto, right? I mean, it's your three realms, and I think sometimes I don't want to say we bunch them together, I think people, but like you said, what does low mean? Yeah. Right? So what's, fast? It's the same thing. What's fast? Well, what's a fast 100-mile time? It's like, well, you got to give me the course.
For me, it would be finishing.
Yeah, right. So like, but I think, but I think it's true to that. I think we're trying, and I like it to a degree. I think as athletes, you're always trying to get the edge, right? Whatever that is for you. You know, whether it's a training block, whether it's food, whether it's a supplement, whether it's training like strength training, whether it's mind training, whether it's whatever it is. I think everybody's trying to find that edge for them. Right? And I think the nutrition side that I've seen has been the biggest explosion. Yeah. And not that it hasn't been around. We've talked about that a lot of these things have been around for a long time. Yeah. But I think now they're just being more brought to light based on what we're doing. Right. Yeah. So when you talk about, recovery, so here's a good one. Like why then, and maybe I'm gonna put you on the spot. Yeah. Why when people say, "Oh, after a race, after thing, I drink chocolate milk and I just feel like recovered," right? I feel like I'm not as sore the next day. Yeah. So what's chocolate milk do for you?
Yeah. So I actually read a study on this like 2 days ago.
Okay, perfect.
I think it's like called chocolate milk as a recovery aid. There's this traditional wisdom that as a recovery agent, you want something that is like a 1-to-4 ratio of protein to carbohydrate, and chocolate milk pretty much hits that to a T. Okay. There's enough sugar in it to get some carbohydrate. There's some protein in there as well, and it has that really good ratio. I don't think it's the best thing you could be ingesting.
I think it's easiest though, right?
It's
probably
because
it's super handy. You can get it anywhere.
Absolutely. The main reason, I don't think it's the best thing you can be ingesting is actually nothing to do with health. It's that, to get enough protein to really instigate that recovery, then you were going to have to probably drink a half gallon of it, right? Like it is, but the ratio is really good. You'd probably be better off having some kind of protein shake with some extra carbohydrate in there to make that balance. But that's why it's touted as that, because of this like beautiful, perfect ratio. And I will also say for anybody listening, like the 4-to-1 is designed for very high level athletes, right? So like I'm not pushing that hard. I can't.
Yeah.
Like I'm not that good.
Yeah.
So, like mine is probably closer to 2-to-1, maybe 3 on a really heavy day, but that's where that came from.
So then, like say a Scratch Labs recovery drink. You know, there's other companies out there. I mean, I've used Scratch before.
Sure.
You've got First Endurance, who has a great one, and then there's like a lot of other brands don't market them as a recovery, but it's a protein drink, right? So would you look at those based on? I mean, I know they're all different, probably different recipes, but probably pretty similar. Do you look at those as better than chocolate milk because they probably have a little more, say, science to them?
Yeah, I mean, they might be a little better. They're probably a little more effective in many ways. They're also probably 4 times as expensive, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it's like that's kind of what that comes down to.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I mean, why do you need a recovery drink at all? Would be the one thing. Like running is what we'd call catabolic. It tears your muscles apart. That's what it does. Any activity does, but running really like has a very tear down effect. So when you're done, if you want to recover, you kind of want to instigate that early. Yeah. And the 2 things you do to make that happen are start to replenish your glycogen with carbs and try to instigate muscle protein synthesis. You try to like get your protein systems back on the rebuilding side rather than the tear down side. So for me, I do fine with dairy. So I put a bunch of like cheap but very good quality whey protein into a blender with some fruit and some honey, and I get like a 2-to-1, 3-to-1 ratio, and it works really well for me. It's going to be very personally dependent.
What about a deep fried cheese curd? Like a quality cheese, you know, like a beer battered curd. I mean, it seems to me like I'm listening to myself talk, and that seems like an excellent recovery source. You got some dairy, and you got the beer batter in some type of oil. That can't be bad for you after a run. I mean, that's got to have something, right? And an IPA.
No,
you're kind of hitting a lot of the marks there.
Honestly, you're hitting a bunch of the marks there. Isn't like half bad, right? Like you're gonna get some protein from the cheese. You're gonna get whatever. Like there are people that are, and I'm one of them, that's gonna tell you like deep fried oil tends to not be the best, mostly because of how long it's reused. But if you're making your own, fine. And then you get the carbs from the beer. Alcohol's not the best, but it's also not the worst thing in the world. So
Well, I'm not a high end athlete either, so for me, that's kind of my fueling system at the end of a long run. You know, it's something I good. So recovery wise, then I mean, there's not like I think again, there's not a magic pill, there's not a magic recipe, there's not a magic anything.
Right.
So does it come down really to the person? Like what works for them. We're all built differently on how we do anything, right? So It's like you kind of find your own thing, and then I think you made a good point is like, what are you trying to recover, right? Is it because you hear a lot of people, I'm not as sore today. I had a chocolate milk yesterday after my run. I'm not as sore, but I mean, you could say, well, did you have a cool down? Did you do any stretching? Did you do any foam roll? All those things. But I think there's like a lot of pieces, right? Yeah. So it's not like I just drank chocolate milk tomorrow. I'm going to be killer, right? I mean, it seems like I feel that way most of the time. I have a routine.
Yeah.
So is that kind of the same thing with like running? You find your routine that works for you. Not to say you can't look at somebody else and say, oh, they do that. Maybe I'll incorporate, but it's not right all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's going to help a little bit as to what your overall intake matters more than anything else, right? Like if you were eating 30 grams of protein a day, that's really low for anybody who doesn't know. If you're eating 30 grams of protein a day, I don't care if all of that comes directly after your run, you're still not going to recover that well. Like everything works on averages and consistency and some level of like overall volume, right? Be it food, training, whatever. And that's kind of where we end up here. And then if your overall intake is where it needs to be, then we can start to narrow in these, like, are you getting the best benefits from 30 minutes post-workout, right? But if you're eating 1,000 calories under where you need to be for your training volume and your output, you're going to break, you're going to. I don't care. It's not a matter of if, it's when. And like I can say this from personal experience. Like I overtrained in a caloric deficit forever, and it's one of the reasons I've been injured a lot. I didn't know any better. I was in my early 20s. I don't fault it. It's just like it's a physical fact.
Well, I think you say that you're early 20s, so someone in like I'm 50, so there's going to be other markers, right, that I have to pay attention to, and even weight. If I'm heavier than I was 5 years ago, you know, your body, your organs, your everything else, it does change. Yeah. So just because it worked or didn't work doesn't mean the opposite of those, right? And so I think it comes down to that same thing. So the one I'm interested in hearing a little bit about is the fasting side of things. Okay. I've seen that, you know, more and more. It's like, I fasted, and, you know, I didn't dive deep into it. I understand, you know, kind of what it is, but like, what are the pros and cons to fasting, and why, for someone like me, why are people fasting for performance or better training or lifestyle?
Sure. I think some of this comes down to like a misunderstanding and like what we qualify as fasting and all of that. So like, where are you on that front? So I can like answer the question for you, and I can then also dive deep. Like, what does fasting mean to you? What are you seeing? All that kind of stuff.
Fasting to me means like not eating for 2 hours, right? Like I like right? food in front of me. But no, I see people say, you know, I fasted for 12 hours. I fasted for 24 hours.
Sure.
I haven't really seen a lot after that. I know people do, but I mean, that's more what I'm looking at is why would you fast for 12? Why would you fast for 24? I think to me, those are the ones I see the most of. And I don't follow people that do it. I don't read about it. It's really interesting to me.
Yeah.
And being someone that likes food, it's like, I don't know why I'd want to, really. So what that's why I was kind of curious, like the benefits and why people are doing it.
Cool. So like when we're going to hit this from a few ends. So when I originally lost 50 pounds when I was 20, right? I did that through a bunch of body weight training, biking, and intermittent fasting. Huge part of the component. Like the original version of this, called the Warrior Diet by Ori Mekloff. And now, like looking back on it, worked fine. Partially because I was able to stay consistent with it, because I was very busy. So one meal a day worked fine for me. I also don't really have an off switch, so I can put down 2,000 calories at a time. It's not really that hard for me. So all of that worked. In retrospect, knowing what I do now, I was creating a calorie deficit in a way that worked. Right? Like that's why I lost the weight.
Was it kind of like one of those things where you backed into it? It was like almost you did something, but it accidentally went like that.
Yeah.
Like the correct calorie deficit or the right formula.
That's what all these things do, right? Be it low fat of the 80s or keto now or whatever. Like you're creating calorie deficit. There are other benefits. There's other things they do. We can talk about like the positives and negatives to any of these diets from a like metabolic standpoint. If you're losing weight, you're in a calorie deficit. And if you're not, you're not. And I know we're going to get to weight later, so just short on that. Like the other thing that people misunderstand there, and as much as I will sometimes use a calorie tracker as a tool, they are not great for a lot of people because your metabolism also adapts. So if you're in a caloric deficit for a long time, your metabolism will actually regulate downward to match that so that you don't die. So if you eat in a deficit for a long enough time, that will become like this new like base set point.
So you're kind of just reprogramming your body to a degree.
Bingo. And that has side effects that are not always great. But when I hear like I lost weight, you were by definition in a calorie deficit, and you can create that any way you want, right? And that's kind of where I was in my 20s. And the benefits to intermittent fasting can be, or fasting in general, right? So one of the things we talk about with fasting are like the health benefits and then the performance benefits and then the weight benefits. Covered the weight benefits. The health benefits are often come down to what's called like autophagy, which means like self-cleaning of your body systems, self-eating, right? So this became really popular partially with the rise of keto and some other things. And we don't fully understand this process is one thing that kind of gets at me. And a lot of people act like it is very set science when it is still actively developing.
Okay.
Right? So we know that autophagy happens. We know, like, if you give your body a bit of a rest from intaking food, it'll kind of start to eat itself. And some of that process is, some of it's bad. Like, you might have muscle wasting if you do it long enough. Some of it's good. It goes through self-cleaning processes like getting rid of your cancer cells and all that kind of stuff. Right? So there are these benefits to that. Those processes don't kick in solidly until you've been fasting for like 48, 72 hours, somewhere in there. You'll get smaller doses daily, but that's where they really kick up.
Okay.
And then the other health benefits can be, if you eat a giant meal before you go to bed, you're not going to sleep very well, right? So if we can cut your feeding window a little shorter, you're probably not going to be pounding a bunch of food right before you go to sleep. So you might sleep a little better. Your cortisol, and which is like your stress hormone that keeps you alive and motivated, which gets a lot of bad rap. It's a necessary thing that we need, or else you'd never be awake, right? But like you're
like ever.
Like if you don't have cortisol, you're asleep. So your cortisol is a little higher in the morning, so you might digest certain things a little better in the morning. You're a little more insulin sensitive, which most people know insulin because of diabetes. Also, necessary hormone. You need it to happen. But when you eat sugar all day long, it tends to go a little out of whack, right? So these benefits to fasting can keep you a little healthier. It becomes a little more of an issue when we look at it from a performance space, though, where if you are burning 4,000 calories a day because you run an amount like Jim Walmsley, then you need to eat that much food or else your body will fall apart. And you can put that into a couple meals, or you can spread it throughout your day. It doesn't really matter for the most part. But we need to like create that caloric balance if you want to perform well, right? And then if you are trying to use fasting, we see the same thing from low carb, where like fat adaptation or fat adapted or any of this stuff. Yep. And this is another big thing here, where a lot of people try to get more fat adapted to use more fat, a higher ratio of fat during their race from a food standpoint. And you can do that. We don't see a lot of performance benefit from it. So they've done studies like back-to-back on people. There are changes that happen. You use a higher percentage of fat. We don't really see you go any faster with that. It might be a benefit in that you need to eat less on your race. Okay. So if you're doing something like, what was I staring at yesterday? Oh, the Bigfoot 40, right? Okay. So you do this like long 40-mile loop through the middle of nowhere around Mount St. Helens. Looks like a beautiful race. I'd actually like to do it sometime. But there's 2 aid stations. Yeah. You need to carry a lot of food or else you're going to get stranded. And if you're a little more fat adapted, something like that could be super helpful there. Yeah. Right? If you were trying to do an FKT in the middle of nowhere across the Appalachian, you might benefit from some fat adaptation, like specifically so you don't have to carry as much food. But if you're doing the races most people are doing, where there's an aid station every 6 miles and you have an opportunity to refuel and refill and all this stuff, it is not the best use of your time. And then we also end up with, the longer you train, like up to a point, first 5 years or so, the more aerobically fit you get, the more fat adapted you get. So while this might be helpful for if you have a race with fewer aid stations, or if you're trying to get a little bigger of an edge later, it's not necessarily it shouldn't be your first plan of attack.
So with that, just because I'm listening and I'm processing that, like the fat adaptive. So the other thing I look at when you were saying that, the first thing I kept thinking was, well, if I'm fat adapted, right, for longer, that means I'm probably not having to take food or gels
as much, yeah.
Right. And so could that help anywhere just based on, because people's stomachs go south in 50s, 100 milers, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh, I'm nauseous. I can't have another gel. So by not having to worry about fueling, and I say worry about it, but
Sure.
you're adapted to it,
It
then
is
that
a
could
worry,
be
yeah.
a benefit, right? Like
Yes.
I'm not putting things in my stomach to make my stomach sour. And, so therefore it's not just benefiting me because I don't have to carry as much. You see that the fat adapted athletes, they just got maybe a water bottle. They don't carry a pack, a belt. They're not really needing it, right?
Yeah.
But there also is there a benefit about that whole stomach going bad, right? By you're not putting stuff in there.
Yeah, it absolutely can be, right? And it kind of depends on where you're coming from too. So it's like someone who I've done time in keto. I've originally lost a bunch of weight through intermittent fasting. I'm not all that carb dependent. I'll forget to eat till 4 p.m. sometimes, just because I get busy. If you wake up and are starving, then you're probably a little insulin resistant, and that might be a larger benefit to you as well, because you're a little more carb dependent than maybe you want to be. Okay. And this is where we come back to your point about everybody's different, and we're coming from a different place, and we have kind of different goals. From a pure performance standpoint, yeah, it could help. Another thing that could help is you could get fitter. So if you have a better aerobic engine.
That's hard.
Yeah, I know. I know it is.
I don't want the hard route. What's the magic pill?
Right?
What's the magic gel?
Oh, man. If I knew that, I would be a billionaire.
Yeah.
Oh, shit. But, like, you could get fitter. You could train harder. And when you do those things, you'll also get more fat adapted. And if you feed yourself properly, you can also train harder to get fitter, right? So your training will be better. So there's like that cycle as well. There is that trade-off there. That said, though, like if you really struggle to make it more than a couple hours without food, which I know we were in jest there, but like some people I've definitely met who are that way. They get like very hangry after 2 hours.
Yeah.
You're probably a little too carb dependent. And during a peak to a race is probably not the time to do this, but some point in your year, you might consider working a little more towards some fat adaptation and cutting out some carbohydrate so that you lose a little bit of that insulin resistance.
But at the end of the day, though, like the stuff I do read, and I think carbs have a super bad name in general. I'm not saying they do or don't deserve it, but
they don't.
In general, like if you cut carbs, you're going to be and I'm throwing this out there, but kind of healthier, right? Because it's like an inflammatory responses. There's a lot of like carbs that are refined, sugars, all these things. So if you are a little more careful, maybe is the right word, with your carbs, because people tell me, if we stop eating bread, I'd lose so much weight, or if you stop doing this, I'm like, well, I think if you exercised and you did that, maybe moderately, you could probably do it as well. So, but I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think carbs just have a really bad. You hear carbs and people run the other way.
Yes.
When I hear carbs, I'm like dinner bell, right? Like give them, I'll take them. Yeah, I'll take your carbs. That's all right to a degree.
I ate a bunch of potatoes like an hour ago. It's really great.
Yeah,
they were great. I'm drinking beer right now. It's absolutely fine.
I feel 100% healthy and not inflamed.
I'm also going to run for 2 hours tomorrow. So those are corresponding factors.
Yeah, and I think it goes to that point because you talk about. I mean, there's so many variables to nutrition.
Yeah.
I think from any standpoint, not to say it's not to training or anything else, but to me, nutrition is such a tricky thing, right? Because it's like, I'm going to be super serious with my training this year. I'm going to really crack down on so if you're doing all this at once, if I change my daily diet, if I change and up my training and I start strength training, I'm going to be out of whack. Like I've done it before where I've done the whole food, right? So I've done that on a training block. I was exhausted. And I remember I went to run with some friends, and I was dizzy. And they're like, what happened? I'm like, well, I haven't eaten for a while. I'm like, dude, you need to eat some. So I grabbed a couple almonds, thinking that was the solve-all, because that was in my whole food 30 diet, and it didn't quite work. I ended up walking for a little ways. My body came around. But I think there is that process of don't do everything at once to the T, right? I mean, and I'm not saying – again, it's everything, but I think for the most part, you can't hit it like, okay, January 1, I'm going keto, my training's getting up to 50 miles a week, and I'm back in the gym. I think that's just a recipe for failure because you're going to get tired and I can't do this.
Yeah, failure at best. You might get injured too, which is super fun. And like this, oh God, there's so much in there that like was just running through my brain.
I just lob it up, and that's your turn to whack them.
So, and Love it. So we are looking at carbs from a whole like multifaceted perspective, right? So carbs are inflammatory if you eat too many of them. Anything is inflammatory if you eat too many of them. Based on our current like way of things and the food pyramid that has now been fairly debunked and all this stuff, like there's a shitload of carbs everywhere.
Yeah.
It is really easy to eat a lot of them, right? And not only are they carbs, so one, if you eat a bunch of carbs you don't use, you're going to end up insulin resistant, inflamed, all this stuff. It leads to problems from cardiovascular disease to diabetes to pick a thing.
Yeah.
It is a factor in cancer. It is a factor in every major disease. That does not mean carbs are bad. It means you should eat the amount that you're planning to use.
Yeah.
Right. And you don't need to go get a metabolic test. You need to like keep an eye on your food occasionally. And most people need, I don't know, less than they probably take in.
Yeah.
On a daily basis.
But I think carbs are like the easiest thing and the tastiest things, right? I mean, they're easy to get to. It's inexpensive on the food chain, right? They're easy to get. It's like drive-thrus. I'm hungry. There's not healthy choices. I got to eat. You go to a store, you got $10. I need to go as long as I can. I just bought 2 cases of ramen, right? But I didn't buy one healthy thing. So I think there's a lot of variables to that, and it's
100%.
We're seeing it, right? Everywhere.
A lot of them also come with a bunch of excess fat. So like it's not the carb, right? Like there's a few things that are all related here. So a sweet potato, high in carbs. Most people don't think it's unhealthy, right? Like even Whole30 and paleo. Like unless you're very keto, most people think a potato or a sweet potato is healthy. A potato is also healthy, just for the record. Like it's very different. It has more potassium. It's a little starchier, but not really. Like they're both great. You should eat a potato. But like when we look at this stuff for weight loss, so a lot of the times carbs come with fat. A candy bar comes with a bunch of fat as well, and it's really easy to put this down. Then we also end up with soda. Not demonizing soda. If you like it occasionally, have it. Like it's better than probably arguably the beer we're drinking. But
I disagree.
Whatever.
With that. I'm going to cut that out of the show.
I mean, I don't drink it, but I really don't. It's not actually my taste. I would rather have a beer any day. But like it's not inherently unhealthy. It is that it is so easy to put down hundreds of calories of carbohydrate with no nutrition in there at all. And then when you cut out all your carbs, you tend to go towards some pretty micronutrient-dense foods because what's left, right? What is left is vegetables and protein and typically healthy fats if the diet's constructed fairly well. So you end up fairly healthy. Now, if you're trying to do really heavy weightlifting or sprint work, you're going to bonk like immediately. And it's going to hurt and you're going to feel really drained. Right? And like I had this with an athlete about a year ago now where he, a much better athlete than I'm ever going to be, very high level, like football player all the way through high school into a little bit of college, now runner and schemo and all this stuff. And he was getting all of his carbs, which was low, like 150 grams a day, from quinoa and the occasional potato. Super healthy diet. But then he'd get 2 hours out into a ski touring adventure, and he'd wonder why he had no energy left. Like, 'cause you didn't eat anything.
He's not
all
sucking
day.
the quinoa out of between his teeth.
Yeah, like you didn't eat anything all day, and you crashed at 2 hours, and then you're such a good athlete that you managed to keep going for another 4 and enjoy your day because of how fun it was. But I was just like, man, take a jar of honey with you and have like a teaspoon every 15 minutes after the first hour. And his first response to me after that was, well, I've been demonizing sugar for years. Sugar is great. I feel so good now. It was like a little oversimplified, but yeah, man, you have a carbohydrate in your system. Like it's fine. You're out there for 6 hours. You are easily, at the snow and the hiking and the skiing, going to burn 5,000 calories today.
Well, I always look forward to Coke near the end of a race at the aid station. If there's Coke, I always get that quick jolt. It's not the caffeine. It's just having some of that sugar. Or if I go too long, I finished a race before on Antelope Island. I'd laid down in the back of my car until someone handed me a Coke, and then I started to feel better, right? Yeah. So I think there's all those things like you talk about. You can't look at everything big picture and also have other variables like you're talking about, like hardcore training, right? Compared to somebody that works in the office, goes home and doesn't do anything. That's a different cycle, right? So, but when you train, you have that. So, I mean, here's the thing. I love this, and I knew this would happen with nutrition because there's just so much. And and so we're going to have you on again. Cool. If you that's your choice.
I'll go as
there's
long as
no
you
contract.
Want. I'll talk about this till you're bored.
No, but I love having segments because what we did, for those that aren't aware, is in social media, I posted the question that I was going to have a nutrition, someone to talk nutrition on, and I had questions that's coming in. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to not. So we'll go through these. Some we may have answered a little bit. Yeah. But we've got like 7 or 8 questions, and I know it might join another. So if you don't mind, you ready to tackle some of these? So these are all from some great, I recognize so many names. So this is from Preston. He says, the topic of weight and racing weight seems to be a hot topic these days. As a bigger runner, I know I'm at my best at a certain weight. However, there seems to be a lot of negativity associated with runners who want to lose weight. Why is it such a polarizing topic these days? Is there a space where runners who need to eat more and runners who need to be more conscious of what they are eating can coexist? Right? So this is kind of like, maybe not like a nutrition type, but I mean, you see it being in the gym and with athletes. Preston, he's got one of those names. He's Preston Wood. He's been on the show. Mm-hmm. A fantastic runner, former football player, lineman. So his life has changed dramatically. Yeah. So how do you look at that? I know running, like being a heavier runner, he's like, the Clydesdale division. The bigger force, right? And then you got the Walmsleys, right? Yeah. That the wind blows, he's going off the mountain, and I'm still trekking right along the top of it. So what's your thought there?
Yeah, I love this question. I hate this topic, and I'll talk about it as much as you want. So, weight's hard. Kind of figure out where to line this from. It is a tough topic to discuss, and it is so sensitive because we have aligned weight with a bunch of other shit. Yeah, to be very blunt. Yeah, and as someone so I got into the ultra running space because I hated talking about weight loss. There's other factors, right? Like I told you, I was helping people, and that's really my whole goal here. But I hate talking about like weight loss publicly. If you want to do it personally, that's fine. But as someone who was overweight and like over fat for my entire teenage years, seeing a bunch of marketing media that says it like indescriptibly says you're a fat piece of shit is not a thing I like. Yeah. Right. And there are some people who do that very well. But it's a hard conversation to have because your like moral worth is not related to your weight. Yeah. Right. And on the other end of that, though, we've swung really far the other direction where it's like, if you don't have a bunch of extra fat, then you're probably going to be a little healthier for you. Right. Or if you don't have the habits that keep you there, you're going to be maybe a little healthier. Like there are some things that the fat does. It makes your testosterone aromatize, for example. So you're not going to have as high testosterone, all this kind of stuff. But a lot of connection has also just been made with not necessarily the weight or the extra fat as much as it is like if you're eating 12 pounds of McDonald's a day, then it's probably not the healthiest for you. Whereas if you switch your diet up a little bit, you might not lose a pound, but you're still going to get healthier. Yeah. Right. So that is kind of where we ended up in this space. And it has been a backlash to what has been a really not pleasant conversation from the other end for so long that now we've just like had an acceptance movement that I generally really like. I just kind of appreciate the honesty from both ends. Yeah. Now, from a running perspective, weight doesn't matter so much. Weight in proportion to your power output definitely does. So And there is a point where weight's going to matter, period.
Yeah.
Right. So like I'm 5'7", I weigh 180. It's the heaviest I've weighed in like quite a long time. I've also like built so much muscle in my legs that I'm actually struggling less than I ever have with this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Like I was getting injured more when I was 155. My knees were worse when I was 155. It's because I've partially gained weight, but gained weight in the like muscular way that I've gotten better at this. That said, like if I were trying to like get on stage at a bodybuilder competition and end up at like 215, my knees would be livid. Like, it's just not a thing my frame could take very well.
Yeah.
So there is a spot for you there. The other end is like they've actually shown that maybe extra muscle on your upper half can be a little more detrimental to your running than even some of the extra fat, partially because like it doesn't need to be there. You should have some, right? Like muscle keeps you safe, it keeps whatever. Like I have a separated shoulder, a bunch of muscle in my shoulder. If I fall down, it keeps it safe.
Yeah.
I also like to climb and do other shit, but like there's a border there. The big thing that I think people end up with a problem here is if you were training for an event in the near future and you're in a peaking training cycle, you're in a heavy training cycle, and you are in a caloric deficit, you're bound to get hurt, right? You cannot run 120 miles a week in a caloric deficit. You're going to get hurt. So this is why you see a lot of backlash to it, because if you want to lose weight and it would be healthy for you, or you want to lose fat specifically and it would be healthy for you, that's great. My life got a lot better from going from 205 to 155 when I was 20, right? My life would be like worse if I had that extra weight. I'm not saying yours is if you're there, but that's me. I really don't judge the desire to weight loss. I will say if you are like coming up on a race in 6 weeks, it's the same shit. Like you should probably trim your strength training volume a little bit too, so that you can focus on the running. You should feed yourself well enough so you can recover from the running. Yeah. And this becomes a little more relevant at like shorter distances too. If you're trying to sprint an 800 meter, your weight matters a little more than if you're trying to run 100 miles. Yeah. It'll largely even out over that distance. Nice. So as I said, happy to talk about this. Like it's a very fueled topic, and that's kind of why.
All right, next one is from David. David, he's down south. He says, best fueling options for people with diabetes. So I know David, he's been running for a while. He's put in some big runs and things like that. But that's a great question. I wouldn't even begin to know. So best fueling options for people with diabetes. Yeah,
it's a really good question. I'm going to lead off with I'm not a doctor or a registered dietitian, right? Like I'm a coach and I'm pretty smart about food, but I'm not a clinician. Yeah. So there's that. They have shown that when you are being really active, you do not tend to end up with as many glucose spikes as if you would be in your day-to-day sedentary life. So if you're currently running, the likelihood that you're going to end up with these gigantic spikes from a gel or a soda or whatever, much lower. Okay. So your fueling will probably be fairly similar to someone else. That said, in your day-to-day, it is probably going to be a little different.
That's something, too, I think, is you don't go from one to the other like that. Like you'd probably dabble maybe like a half a gel, right? Or a quarter of a gel and see just kind of how you feel. But would it also depend on your output? Yeah. So like if you were doing crazy vert as opposed to a flat run, right? Yes. So I think with that one, and that could go, I mean, that's across the board, 100%. Right? But I mean, that's probably the best way is kind of like just incrementally fill that out, right?
I mean, I think that I tend to view fueling during a race like you're trying to mimic an IV, and this is for everybody. Like your hydration should be very consistent, your salt should be very consistent, and you don't quite know what's coming out of you, so that's really tough to do. But
sometimes you really know what's coming out of you. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah, that's fair. But you don't know exactly what you're expecting, so it's like tough to make that happen. But like theoretically, you'd be better off like putting an IV in your arm and running the race, like if it wouldn't impede your motion. Yeah. And the best you can mimic that with food, the better. And while most people will have more leniency in that, if you have a very sensitive stomach or you are diabetic or have any of these things, it's going to need to be a lot more consistent. You're just going to need to be a lot more on point. And if you're really worried, I would consider getting a CGM, continuous glucose monitor. You can get them from places like NutriSense and Levels for like $100, $200 now, and go put one on and see what it does to you during the race. And if you see what it does to you like once or twice, it should be pretty consistent.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. Next up, we've got Missy from California. She says, I have a tough time taking in solid foods during training and races because of my constant dry mouth. What are some good options to help break up the gel fatigue that happens?
Cool. So 2 ends. If you have constant dry mouth, I have a strong suspicion you're dehydrated. So a lot of nutrition issues are hydration issues. So if you haven't, consider like doing a sweat test. And Eric and I will talk about this right at the end, but like I have a guide for this, like we can get that done. But consider doing a sweat test and see what your like actual fluid intakes might need. Because if you are dry mouthed, you probably need to hydrate a little more. And that should make your food intake a little easier. Now, some people just have that tendency a little more, or if you're running in really dry climates, like I lived in Tucson, Arizona for 6 years, like it didn't matter how much I intook, like I'm going to have some dry mouth.
She's from California, like the hot, dry, deserty thing. I'm pretty sure. All the pictures she posted looks hot and dry.
Yeah, man. So like really make sure your hydration's on point would be my first thing. And then second, if you can't intake solid foods and you struggle with the palate fatigue, I actually really like unflavored products a lot. So I kind of hack a lot of my liquid nutrition. I buy pure maltodextrin off of Amazon because it's like $13 for 2 pounds. I'm also just cheap. And then I'll buy like called highly branched cyclic dextrin. It's also called cluster dextrin. It's what's in Scratch's super fuel. Sorry. So what's in Scratch is super fuel, and you can buy that purely on Amazon as well. It doesn't taste like anything, and you can just put it in liquid. And you can make a very like concentrated solution of that, so you don't have to drink that much of it. And then you can have your hydration and your nutrition separated by a bit of a barrier, even though they're both this like liquid product. So that would be one way to do it. And then I know Tailwind also makes unflavored product, as do a bunch of other things as well. So that'd be one way to go.
That's a great point. I never actually, that you say that, I never thought of that because flavors sometimes get you. It's like super sugary, or your favorite flavor turns into the flavor you'll never eat ever again after a race.
When I was cycling like many miles a week, like there weren't as many options.
Yeah.
Right? Like it was Ride to Scratch was coming out, but the main ones were like Goo and Cliff, and they worked great. But like if I ever taste a couple of those flavors again, I'm going to murder someone.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I just can't do it.
I've had bad reactions.
Mm-hmm.
I hear a flavor and I kind of get the bad feeling.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Again, I think some of these two are tricky just because you don't know lifestyle, people. Best meal the night before a long run or a long ultra. So like a night before, what's a good meal? And I know that one's to me, it's a loaded question. I heard someone today, I talked to him like, oh, the night before races, I do pancakes and scrambled eggs. And I'm like, never thought of breakfast before. I love it, but what are some good long meals before a run? Because it used to be, man, you got to go to a bunch of spaghetti.
Yep.
Right?
Yes. So couple factors here. The carb loading thing is real. It was also overplayed. Like, as anybody who played sports when they were younger, like I'm sure you've eaten one of those giant pasta dinners and then felt like garbage on game day. Don't do that. So carb loading helps. The way to do it properly is to slightly increase your carb intake the entire day prior to your race, and not a
big
lot,
huge
right?
dump.
So, yeah, exactly. So you're not trying to eat like 3 pounds of pasta the night before. You might have like an extra pancake at breakfast on Friday, like an extra piece of bread at lunch on Friday, and then like an extra helping of rice on Friday night or something like that, and it'll get you there. And then just kind of top yourself off Saturday. So carb loading is your glycogen stores are replenished on like a 24 to 36 hour period. So like starting Thursday night, just slightly increase your carbohydrate intake, and then you should be good by Saturday morning. The other thing people worry about is fiber. So there's a lot to fiber. It is a kind of a complicated topic, and it does seem to be very personally dependent. certain types of fiber will make you go to the bathroom faster. Certain
yeah.
types of fiber will like back you up a little more. You probably want less fiber on Friday if your race is on Saturday. The exact amount, I don't know. Like, you really want just enough to go poop on Saturday morning, and that's about it, man. Like, and so not a ton of vegetables the night before. A little bit more on the carbohydrate front, and then a meal that will honestly be comforting and relaxing and help you sleep. Because if you don't sleep the night before, that's a big one. And like all of us have had those nights where you can't sleep before a big event and it sucks. So something that kind of winds you down can help too.
Okay, that was from Stephanie, by the way. The next one is from Thomas, and his kind of is pretty similar. It says, best pre-race food. I don't eat much before early morning training runs, but feel more empty on longer runs with maybe a bit more effort. So what's like you wake up, either you have a race or you've got your long run, and you're probably going to put more effort than a normal training day. It sounds like what is like a good something to have in your stomach to start off.
Yeah, I wouldn't start too heavy. So during race or anything, unless you're going really slow, you don't want a lot of fat or fiber. Both of those take a long time to exit your stomach. They can take like 3 to 4 hours. So unless you're really fit or kind of cruising at a pretty slow pace, like you don't want anything super fatty or fibrous or anything like that. Carbohydrates are going to be kind of your friend here. And maybe a little bit of protein to kind of mitigate some damage, but the big thing is going to be a little bit on the carbohydrate front. I like a banana or two, maybe. Some people do fine with the bagel. Some people do bagel and cream cheese, but the big thing is going to be get some fuel in you. And if you are doing work for like less than an hour, it's not as necessary. So it makes some sense that you're not hitting that point. But if you're on a longer effort, start fueling early, and carbohydrates really your friend.
What about Pop-Tarts?
Yeah,
That you actually, for real, used to be my go-to for a long time. I'd have raspberry Pop-Tarts.
One of my current athletes has a Pop-Tart, too.
Really?
It's gold time.
Yeah. I mean, I tasted good. They weren't heavy.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I don't know. Who knew? Who knows? I don't know, but they 100%. Were good.
I mean, honestly, if it sits well in your stomach and it's a little fueling, I like a banana and or a potato because they both have some bonus potassium in them, which can help with muscle contractions and cramping and all sorts of stuff. But if it has some carbohydrate in it and sits well with you, it's a pretty good way to go. And honestly, most people could start earlier than they do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next one. I tend to eat dinner right before I go to bed, and every night I seem to run extremely hot and cannot sleep. Is it something I'm eating, something I'm doing, or something I can do differently?
You could eat dinner earlier would be the answer here. Now, I realize timing can be tough. As I mentioned, I worked ski resorts and grooming, so I worked the night shift for like 5 winters in a row, and so I'd come home, slam food, and then go to bed at like 1 p.m. So it's hard sometimes depending on your work, but the thing that's going on there is your body is digesting food. When you're digesting food, your temperature is going to be somewhat elevated, so you're not going to be able to rest as well. So eat a little earlier, give yourself a bit of a time break. If you have the money, you could get a device like an Ooler or a chili pad that goes on your bed to cool the bed. I think 8 Sleep has another one. You could crank the AC, but really the answer food-wise is going to be eat earlier. Now, you might also have some food sensitivities, right? So if you were celiac and you had gluten, that's going to raise your temperature because your body's freaking out trying to get rid of it. If you have a bunch of alcohol, that'll also raise your temperature. That's one of the reasons alcohol affects your sleep, is because it raises your core temperature while your liver's trying to process it. That's another one. I am really good with dairy most of the time, but I have a slight sensitivity to casein. So if I have a casein protein powder, my temperature raises notably and I can't sleep. So you might have a sensitivity issue, but my guess, based on it was in your question, is you're eating too close to bedtime, your body is digesting, and it's taking a few hours, especially if it's dinner. If you eat dinner with
weird beer, wine or something late.
And it's probably your biggest meal of the day, because it is for most of us. You're probably eating near 1,000 calories at night and then trying to go to sleep, and it's kicking you.
Okay. Awesome.
And And as I said, I empathize. That's why I have a lot of those tools, because like I had no time to eat working an 80-hour week night shift. So there's some other stuff. Feel free to reach out to me. I can help you hack it a little bit, but that's the big one.
Okay. Next one's from Benjamin. Oh, we kind of covered this one, but again, we'll touch it because we'll maybe a little pointed.
Yeah.
Best way to drop weight but train. I need to drop weight but don't want to be tired and lack energy. Also, I would like to build muscle and not hurt it. I mean, based on what you said earlier, how possible is that?
You're cutting a fine line through all of those things. You're probably not going to achieve all those things at once, right? So that's the really blunt answer. We can do some of that. So if you're trying to drop weight and train, a really good way to be in there is trying to do like an aerobic base function block. So you're not going to have a bunch of intensity. You're not going to risk like over leveraging yourself, any of that. So trying to work a little bit on your base, low and slow, keeping your heart rate low. Just you can put in a bunch of volume that way. You can run really frequently. You just like can't crank the intensity. Okay. That's going to be one. If your primary focus is weight loss, then running is actually not going to be your best friend right now. Probably, depending on your background. For most people, the best way to target weight loss is actually cut the cardio for a little while to whatever a base would be for you. So if you think you can run 15 miles a week for the rest of your entire life, then that's fine. But for most people, it's probably not. You're going to have an off week, right? So like pick whatever your very minimum is, kind of stick with that. Really target strength training for a little while, build some muscle, because that will raise your metabolism. It'll teach your body to be a little less efficient. And then once you get to that space, then you can go into a cut by increasing your cardio and making it a little easier. Like it'll functionally melt off once you're there. Okay. And then the strength aspect, trying to gain muscle. So this is the real thing. You're not going to lose fat and gain muscle at the same time unless you are very new to training. You have a period of like a year and a half, what we call in the industry like newbie gains, where you can just leverage your body's like complete inexperience. If you've been training longer than that, it's just not going to happen. You should pick something and stick with it for a couple months and then like target another goal. So if you really want to get better at running or like work on your run training, then find a bit of a deficit, target that aerobic like low intensity so you don't hurt yourself, or like target some strength. You can do that in a bit of a surplus, target the deficit later, or you can also increase your protein a little bit higher than like what would be normal. That will help with muscle loss prevention, so you can maintain the muscle you have while you go into that deficit. But short answer, you're trying to do too much at one time, and we need to prioritize a little bit. And you can achieve all those goals within the round of like 6-12 months. But trying to do all that at once means you're going to do all of them fairly badly.
Gotcha. So would it be, for something like that, it seems to me like when you say not all at once, maybe like you just deal with it, right? If you're training now, you deal with it. Yeah. Whatever happens, then when your quote-unquote season's over, then you focus a little more on the weight loss side before you ramp back up for your next round or season, maybe, something like that,
exactly.
Where you're not focused on both at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm a little heavier than I'd like to be, but I'm kind of accepting it, and I'm going to like move into this like running period for the next few months and see what happens. Like if weight loss happens a little bit with the increase in volume, fine, but it's not going to be a target. And then winter is going to be more my off season from running, and then that would be like a strength building and maybe weight loss phase, like not at the same time, but cycled. So like a strength build a little first, then lose a little weight, then get back to the running. Like it's how a year planning would kind of work. Okay. But your year needs to be in seasons. You have in season, which is whatever you care about, and weight loss is probably not going to happen then unless you're like a competitive fighter. And that's what makes those like weight cuts so ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's also why most of that weight loss is not fat. They drop like 12 pounds in a week due to water manipulation. Like they cut all their sodium, they cut all their carbs, and then they like leverage hormones to like bleed 10 pounds the night before, and it's all water manipulation. So it sucks. Yeah. So like unless you're really just care about the scale and willing to like play with your water like a fighter. If you care about fat loss, then we need to like periodize your year a little bit.
Well, because the water thing is not, it's temporary too, right? So it's like it's a number. So you look at a scale, you're proud. 2 days later, you're probably a pound above that.
Bingo. I mean, I can fluctuate to 5 pounds in a night, like if I'm dehydrated, because I drink a bunch of water every day. And yeah, this is another reason why weight is a struggle.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's really common for people to do a weight loss challenge and they'll lose a bunch of weight, but if they get their body fat percentage, it might actually go up because they'll lose muscle in the process. So we need to have our like end goals and priorities and all that stuff in line.
Well, this is the last one that came in, and this is actually a pretty good one, to be honest with you. When your stomach, this is from Alan, when your stomach goes south, what's the best way to bring it back?
Slow down.
Yeah.
It's really it. If your stomach goes south, there's a whole bunch of stuff that could be going on. You could be dehydrated. You could like be out of salt balance. You could have eaten something a little too fatty so that it sits in your stomach a little too long. And it's not emptying out of your stomach and getting where it needs to be, right? The answer to pretty much all of those things in the moment is to slow down, walk, or like power hike, but probably walk for like 20 minutes, get your hydration levels all stable, and then get back to it. And this is a place where like if you need to walk at, a 20-minute mile for a mile, and then you can get back to running, awesome. Whereas if you keep trying to fight this through and you end up in nausea and vomiting and then you can't eat food for the rest of your race, you might have dropped your like pace for 50 miles way down. So just like I'll tell some athletes to like take an unplanned rest day if you really need to prevent the injury down the line. It's the same here. And like I was telling a story that like I was an idiot on a long run. Like I was fighting a water bottle for like a quarter mile and it like dropped my pace for that long. Whereas I could have just taken 3 seconds to pull it out of my vest and then put it back in. Same concept here. Like just slow down, have a little hydration, let your stomach settle, and then get back to it.
So what if you do get to that point you just talked about? What if you get to that nauseous point or you even do throw up? Because I've done that where I'm already nauseous. Like there's just like, I'm sick. I don't feel good. You got to eat something. Nope. You got to do this. Nope. I mean, what happens? The same thing? Do you slow down? Is there, because I know another thing that goes around a lot is like a ginger chew, to get some ginger in your stomach. Ginger ale, obviously, in ultras is an easy way. Is there anything once you feel it like, oh, I'm getting nauseous?
Yeah, so step one, again, would be slow down for a little bit and kind of reset. The reason you get nauseous most of the time is all of your blood's in your legs and you don't have enough blood volume for your stomach, right? So if we can get some of that blood back to our stomach, it will digest a little better and we can get back to running.
So handstands.
Yeah, 100%. Bunch of crunches to like push the flow of blood there. But like for real, you're probably dehydrated. Some people are at a bigger deficit here. If you sweat really heavy, you might just be dehydrated. You might have a bigger issue for stomach problems. It's very personally dependent. It's one of the first things I do with athletes is try to figure out your race day nutrition. There's like 2 things you can do to get faster at a race with very little effort. It's like figure out your race day nutrition and hydration and figure out how to get through an aid station faster.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like, so if we can, that's one of the first things I do with people. But if we're looking at, you're sour, you're in the problem, it's going to be slow down. See what your hydration's like. If you aren't peeing, you need to fix that. If your pee is like golden, you need to fix that too. You're probably dehydrated. Are you having enough salt? Are your hands swollen? So like, are we having a like hypernatremia, hyponatremia kind of spectrum? Like where are we there? If your hydration's pretty good, probably need to settle a little bit. What did you eat recently? If it was fattier, like I love peanut butter, but it's not a thing I could eat during a race. It's going to make me throw up. I really like the company Spring Energy gels, but like some of their gels are not for me until I start to get fitter. Like it's like Speed Nut. Speed Nut's like 240 calories and it's 20 grams of fat. It's great, especially if you're really fit or on a longer effort. But if you're trying to push a little harder, probably going to sit there and you're going to have some problems. So what did you eat recently? Where are we on the digestion spectrum? What does it feel like? Kind of reassess and get back to it. So that's really where it is. But the first step is slow down. assess and like get your hydration in order.
So that's it for the questions. We do encourage listeners to send questions in. So manners@trailmanners.com, because the goal is to have him on again, so we can answer more. I mean, the more education we can get out there, the more help we can do is best. So if you have any questions, you can email those at manners@trailmanners.com. I mean, that's kind of the topics, but based on everything we've talked about, trends in topics, trends in our conversation, what are some other things that we missed that you think, that you see with your athletes, with the the nutrition side? What are things that we potentially could have missed or we could touch on real quick before we go?
Yeah, so these are kind of longer topics we can do later, but day-to-day nutrition is a big one. Like, where should that be? How can we maybe like periodize throughout the year? And that's going to be really personally dependent, so I'd actually love some like individual questions on this.
Yeah.
Right? And then how do you create a hydration strategy? Like, my first recommendation for people is figure out your sweat rate and do it a few times a year. If you were guessing blindly at how much fluid intake you need and you have stomach problems, don't do that anymore.
So where would somebody do that? Like, if they were interested in doing like that test? And
you can go to that Facebook group that I have called Trail and Ultra Running Nutrition, and there's a guide in there on this. But short version is like, weigh yourself naked before you got for a run. Go run, weigh yourself naked when you come back. The difference is how much sweat you lost, more or less.
So would you drink water? I mean, would you go fast it, or how would you?
If you want to, it's fine. Like, for most people, probably, to keep yourself safe, especially if you're running outside, right? So like, you don't want to get trapped without water, and then just subtract whatever water you intook. Right?
Okay.
So like, that'd be a good way to do it too, and then do that a few times throughout the year. Because your sweat rate's going to be different in January than it will be in June.
Oh yeah.
Especially here, like, we don't live in beautiful coastal California. It is a 100-degree temperature swing between those two. So
there's somewhere to go to find that what is it, a guide?
Yeah. What, the group?
Yeah.
Trail and Ultra Running Nutrition.
Okay.
Or you can go to my website or whatever, which I'll give you to put in show notes, and we can do whatever.
Okay. So yeah, we'll put that in the show notes. We'll put both of them in the show notes just to make it easier for those that are listening and potentially driving. But again, if there are questions, please send them in. I think, throughout the year, this is a topic we will keep discussing on the nutrition side. There's a few that we'll come back to quite a bit. On the show, whether it's, we got some strength training stuff, we got some of this. We're actually going to also talk to some nutrition companies, to kind of just figure out their stuff through. So there's going to be a lot of information coming through. So the more questions you send in, the better we can set these up for the listener. But Will, thank you so much for coming on. We've tried to set this up for a while. Unfortunately, on my end, it's been a drag, working on some new studio stuff, I guess is the best way to put it. But you did raise the guest game a little bit by bringing in some IPAs I've never had, which is always a plus, and cheese curds. I mean, that's the guest game has risen. And that's one of my fears with going to these online podcasts, because it's hard to get together with people. There's so many people across the country. It's going to be hard to get this. I have to supply my own stuff, and it's going to be the same stuff I always have. So it's going to be a bummer, but yeah, seriously, thanks for coming down. Truly appreciate all this information. And I know we literally scratched the surface pretty much on everything. I mean, each thing we talked about, from fasting to keto to nutrition to hydration to all this stuff, is just show up on show. If we really wanted to tackle it. That's why these questions are pretty good, so we can kind of get a little more tuned in and targeted, I guess, is the best way to put it. But at the end of the day, too, everybody's different. So
for sure,
what was said may work for one and may work differently for another.
And then, just like you and I were chatting, I don't think I actually said this on the podcast, but an ultra is like 12 different events, right? Yeah. Like, you're not going to fuel a 50K the same as you will just 6-dayer. I might have mentioned that, but like, that's a real thing that we should recognize. Like, whatever your training is, whatever your fitness ground is, whatever your background is, it's very individually dependent based on your needs, and then also like what you're actually doing and where you are in your training cycle. So it's hard.
Well, and you got the weather component, summer versus winter. You've got the elevation. We should probably talk
about heat and altitude at some point.
Yeah, you got the elevation component. You've got, is it your first ever, ultra, 50K, say? Is it your first ever, and how people ask me all the time, well, how much harder is a 50K than a marathon? Like, they're, it's whatever miles, but how much harder? I'm like, they're everything's harder. I don't care if you're doing 28 miles. You know what I mean? It's like
somebody asked me that the other day, and I was like, you probably have the aerobic fitness to do a 50K if you have done a marathon, but you're going to be running mountains, so you probably need to get your legs might need to be stronger, and you need to get your hydration and nutrition plan down.
Yeah.
Like that's going to be the big difference for sure.
Yeah. So, but yeah, thanks again for coming down. Thanks for talking about it. There'll be links in the show notes there. You can check them out at TrailManners.com, plus wherever you listen to the podcast on the multitude of places podcasts are shown. But thanks for taking your time to come down. We'll definitely get you back on the show. And keep those questions coming, and be ready for more fun this year with the TrailManners podcast. So, Will, thanks again. I'm Eric Manning, and we are out. Thank you for listening to the TrailManners podcast. I'd like to thank Will Frantz for joining us today. Make sure you check out the show notes for some interesting and educational links to help you out along your way. I also want to encourage everybody to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at TrailManners. You can also check out our store page and support the podcast by checking out a t-shirt or whatever else is still on there. Or you can hit us up on the contact page. Let me know what you want to see, who you want to hear, or if you would like to be on the show. And besides, I always love hearing from you. And lastly, TrailManners would love your support via our Patreon account, patreon.com/TrailManners. Until next time, this is Eric Manning reminding you, you don't get what you wish for, you get what you work for. Now go get it.